oracles of God, the story of the New Testament. So I found out about this movie just going to the theater and I saw it was playing. Like I didn't plan on watching it or know it was coming out. I just saw it was playing at the theater, and I thought it was interesting. It was a lot of speculation. It's a documentary, so it's kind of hard to rehash all the stuff they were talking about. But it was a lot of like speculation, and they did like reenactments. So they would have Bible quotes, and they had actors like playing certain scenes or different quotes they had in the Bible. So I'm really not gonna mention that. It's just something you just have to see for yourself. And it was a lot of that throughout the movie, like interspersed between the different speakers talking, and it was interesting. So they talked about how how some letters was written before the Gospels, like um, Peter and Hebrews, Book of Hebrews, Book of Peter. Um, they were talking about how the letters were written first before they believed the letters were written first before the Gospels. And if you like call yourself a scholar or you a Christian, this is something you'd probably be interested in. And some of this stuff I knew already. A lot of this stuff is already written in different books. So this is more for like I would say like beginners or children or people who's not really a Bible scholar or whatever like that. So they mention how the book of Hebrews, the author's not known, and then with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they were comparing it how Matthew, Mark, and Luke is similar, and it has a lot of they call it the synoptic gospels, and it has a lot of parables, and how John was different, and then they talked about who they believe wrote each book, and then also they mentioned how Luke and Acts is actually one book, just like in the Old Testament, like First and Second Samuel is technically one book, and Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy is the Torah is technically one book, but the English translators or whoever, the different translators for different Bibles split it up into different books or whatever. So they analyzed that. It's interesting, and they mentioned how the book of Mark was known as the memoirs of Peter, and a lot of the information they got for this documentary came from like the early church fathers. So um, the early bishops and people like that. They mentioned a few of them by name. I can't remember, but it was a lot of like bishops and clerics and stuff like that. That kind of kept the tradition and translated the stuff how because back then you couldn't translate something with just print it off a computer or whatever. It took years or whatever like that. So that they analyzed that, and then they mentioned how Matthew wrote uh, his book in Greek and Hebrew, two separate books. Like he wrote it in not just writing one and then translate it, but just wrote two different books they mentioned, and they mentioned Luke was a native of Antioch in Syria. Um, just a lot of little facts about different people that's mentioned, and they just analyzed, people's background and who wrote what and whatever. And they mentioned how the book of Jude quotes the book of Enoch, even though the book of Enoch is not in like the King James version translation or whatever. Even though you can get the book of Enoch separate, some translators did it, but it's not in the modern Bible. And after the movie, they did behind the scenes showing how they they did the reenactments of different quotes of different scenes in the Bible, like when Jesus came and got Matthew the tax collector and stuff like that. And they talked about how this it was filmed during the war in the Gaza or whatever, so they had to shut down production and it'll be rockets fired and whatever was going on in Israel at the time they was doing the movie. And last they did a preview of another movie they doing. So it's a series. So they this one, the Oracles of God, the story of the New Testament, is the second in the series. And the first one, I bought the DVD after I saw the second one. So this is similar to the second one. It's just they talking about the New Old Testament and this. So they split it into three movies, but it's just three parts of the same movie basically. And the movie they call in creating the canon, and they gonna talk about why which books were put in the Bible and how bishops were put in jail, and they mentioned how one jail, they arrested a bunch of bishops and they let all the criminals go, the thieves or whoever was in jail, to put the bishops in jail. So they're gonna talk about how the church was persecuted and how the church, the modern day church, got started. I guess I don't know exactly what they're gonna talk about, but I'm guessing they're gonna talk about like how different denominations started, like the Catholics and the Protestant or whatever. I don't know how far up to date they gonna go, but they're gonna talk about the beginning, how it started with all these bishops and how they was persecuted and all that stuff. So it was interesting, and it's it's a documentary, so it's just a lot of talking. I can't repeat everything they're saying, but basically that's it. I'm not gonna mention all the quotes they said, and it's just something you kind of have to see for yourself. Like I said, some of it was speculation, so I'm not really gonna get into it. Um, Basically, like they're saying, some letters, you know, they're not sure who wrote it, but they're guessing who, basically, and then Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, they're kind of guessing. So the thing I liked about the movie is they're admitting that they're not sure about some stuff in the Bible. They mention how some words only used once, and uh, I forget which word it was they mentioned, but they weren't sure how to translate it, and then some people translated it different, but they're not sure. So that's the most important thing I liked about this is it mentioned they admitted, like they don't know everything. Uh, some words, they're not sure how to translate it. Um, they're not sure who wrote whatever this and that. Cause you have some people like some preachers that be like, oh, you gotta get into the word and study the word of God and all this, but these are scholars, and historians and people that studied this, and they're admitting, they're not sure about who wrote what and what certain things mean, just like how the Book of Jude quotes the Book of Enoch, and they're not sure who wrote the Book of Hebrews and all this. So that's what I liked about it, and that's why you have all these different. Now this is just my opinion. Now that's all I'm gonna talk about the movie, but that's why you have all these different denominations and people believe different stuff, but a lot of it is speculation. People are not really sure. So they just take a good guess or whatever. I guess. But that's what I liked about the movie is it documented that, you know. And if you study this, if you're like a scholar, or you've been studying the Bible for years or whatever, trying to learn it, you'll figure this out. But they just put it in, you know, in a movie forms where it's kind of summarizes it, I guess, you know. So that's it. Oracles of God, the story of the New Testament.